My name is Erik B., and I am a crystal meth addict. And I'm from Austin, Texas. And I am thrilled to be here. And I really appreciate the nice introduction I got from Lewis. Lewis and I have known each other for 10 minutes. When we started talking, I had that experience that I have with every addict I've ever talked to, even the ones that haven't found this solution yet. I feel like I know you. I feel like we do have that common experience, and we don't even have to talk that much about it. So I'm really grateful for that. And yes, I did ask for green M&Ms in my dressing room, and Lewis got me 25 pounds of green M&Ms, and that was very good of him and very, very tweaky, you know. So I'm really grateful for that, and I'm thrilled to be here tonight. And by thrilled, I mean terrified. And I qualify for a seat in a lot of anonymous programs, but I never feel more at home than I do when in a room full of tweakers, frankly. So. Before I get started, I'd also like to thank a couple more people. I'd like to thank Sam for asking me to do this. And I'd also like to thank him for advertising with a 10-year-old picture of me. So if you're wondering who this old man is that's standing in front of you, it's that guy in the picture 10 years later. So, and I look like I'm dressed. My honey dressed me tonight, and I feel like I'm dressed like Johnny Cash and a professor had a baby. So, anyway, so finally, I'd like to thank my partner Stephen, and my partner and I have been together for 20 years. I almost forgot to mention, I have been sober since June 7th, 2006. That also happens to be the sobriety date of my partner. And we were both ripping and running together for the first 8 years of our relationship. And that means that we've been sober together for the remaining 12 years since we got sober. And we've got to know each other in a brand new way. And I want to tell you that there is nothing beyond the healing reach of this program. The things that you guys taught me, that's the reason Stephen's sitting here tonight. That's the reason we're together. Because you know what? My disease tells me it's your fault. My disease tells me you're the problem, right? And we got to get rid of you. We got to jettison you. And I never had to do that. And I got to do the work around how I show up in a relationship. And I'm just so grateful you're here. And I'm so grateful we're together. And I'm so grateful we're sober. So, the other thing is, like, let me tell you how it is in our house. It's so spiritual and so healthy that the other day we were arguing in the bathroom, okay? And it was the morning, we were getting ready to go to work, and we were arguing in the bathroom. We got, I'm like, well, whatever. And I go off into the bedroom and I start doing my morning prayer routine. So I'm on my knees, and I'm praying. I'm like, God, give me open-mindedness and willingness and blah, blah, blah. And he walks in the room and I stop. I say, screw you! So clearly you're dealing with a spiritual giant up here. That was like a week ago. So I need to qualify as a real crystal meth addict, and I feel I can do that in 2 words. Tramp stamp, as in I have one. And that should tell you all you need to know about the twisted state of mind that this disease took me to, right? And in my thinking at the time was actually like, okay, I got a tattoo on my left arm. You know what that means, right? And I'm like, well, that's kind of false advertising, right? So I figured a tramp stamp would, send out the message that I'm versatile. Okay. So anyway, now I should tell you a little more about what I was like, what happened, and what I'm like now. And I believe if I'm doing this program right, I can tell you what I was like last week, what happened, and what I'm like now. And I should be able to go, well, what I was like last week is I was a little more selfish and self-centered. And what happened was I worked more on my program. I did more of the suggested actions. And this week I'm a little better. I'm not great, right? Kyle and I do this thing. We do nightly reviews together. And we do this thing where what was the balance of thinking about self and thinking about others? And, for us, 15% others, 85% self. That's a pretty good day, right, Kyle? Yeah, okay. So anyway, so I'm supposed to tell you what I was like, and I used to think it was what it was like. And if you would have asked me what it was like at the time, I suffer from the disease of insanity and delusion, right? So I will tell you what it's like is that I suffer. That's what I would tell you it's like. And in fact, and so I've only got a perspective on what I'm like after recovery, after I was introduced to a solution, after I got some way of seeing the truth about myself and how I show up in the world and how I show up in my relationships. All of this is stuff that I didn't know I needed, but that's what I got as a result of sticking around here and taking some action. So what I was like, what you need to know about my family and my upbringing, I was actually born in Corpus Christi, Texas. I lived there for, a year or two, and then moved up to the Midwest, moved up to Michigan. So, and I grew up, I spent the rest of my upbringing in Michigan. And I think there was a time I would have told you my family has some dysfunction. I think there was a time I would have told you they didn't accept me for who I was. And maybe when I first came out, they had some trouble with it. But since I've gotten sober, and again, since I've gotten the perspective that this program has given me, my family has gotten a lot more functional. And it turns out the truth about these folks is they did the very best they could. And the truth is that my home was one of love and encouragement and kindness. And they tried to instill in me spiritual values, and they tried to instill in me the value of hard work. And they gave me all kinds of moral and philosophical convictions that I ultimately would not be able to live up to, even if I would have wanted to. And so that's the truth about my upbringing. Now, as a child, I'm feeling that anxious apartness. And I've heard any speaker I've ever heard talk about their experience has had that experience, right? Anxious apartness from my family. I feel different than you. You don't accept me. You're better than me. All of these things are feelings that I can remember having long before any chemicals were introduced. And which is kind of what this disease is like for me. Like I think that the mental aspects of this disease showed up long before any chemicals were introduced. In fact, I know it did, right? That anxious apartness, that, my sponsor likes to say, honey, you came out of the womb angry, right? And I wouldn't have told you that. I would have just told you guys are like, I'm mad at you because you're doing it wrong. And if you would just do it right, we're all going to be okay, right? The play is going to suit me, all of that stuff. And so my family actually nicknamed me when I was like 8. They nicknamed me the Happy Farmer, and it was because because I was really like hard to be around, and I was really prickly, and really like they especially knew to avoid me in the mornings, and my sponsor said to me not too long ago, she goes, do you suppose it was confusing to them that all of this love and all of this encouragement and all of this warmth and positivity that they gave you, and you were this prickly, unreachable child, angry, scared child? Do you suppose that was confusing to them? And I said, I suppose it was. Because I think I was like loving up on a cactus, but they did their best, and they continued to try to instill values in me. And they valued education and all this kind of stuff. And so they gave me a lot of stuff that I resented them for a while, right? They made me study this, and they didn't actually do that. But again, like, that was what it was like. I thought they were telling me what to do, and I thought they'd be disappointed if I didn't do that, or if I did do this. So I got a great education, and I used to tell you as part of my story that I'm not a smart guy, that I work harder than the rest of you, and that's how I've achieved whatever I have academically or whatever. That's a lie. I'm smart, and I'm lazy and manipulative, and that worked really well for me. And I actually made a lot of growing up. I achieved a lot. I achieved a lot academically, and this would actually this whole perspective would keep me sick when I ended up in the throes of active addiction. So I went to, I got to tell you, my first experience with any kind of chemical was with alcohol. And the only reason I got to tell you that is that here's a kid with tons of angst. By the way, I also got to tell you about how, what my prayer life looked like. And the reason I tell you that is because I was raised in my family was Methodist, and they kind of half went to church and half didn't. And Methodism is really laid back, and Methodism's like, go to church or don't. We don't mind, whatever, and so, but they tried to instill some values in me and stuff like that. And what I heard was somehow I picked up this like damning and condemning God. I picked up this idea of God that if I was a good little boy, He would reward me, and if I was a bad little boy, He would punish me. Okay. And what happened to me was I started having feelings, those feelings. I started having feelings for boys, right? And I know, right? And in fact, I had this picture Bible, and it had a painting of this shepherd, and I was like obsessed with this shepherd. He was so cute, Exactly, right? Turn it into something sexual, and so I would go. I'm like, man, he looks at that picture Bible a lot, So anyway, so I remember having these feelings, and my relationship with God looked like this. It looked like, God, what did I do? Why have you cursed me? What am I doing wrong? It was painful. It was painful. And I had this sort of deep, dark secret. I'm not going to tell anyone. I'm not going to let anyone know. I remember we rented a cottage one summer on Lake Michigan, and on the coffee table there was this Newsweek magazine. The headline was "Gays in America," and it had these two guys with their hands in each other's jeans pockets, And I remember I read it, and I got depressed for like a month. And my family, my father, who was a medical doctor, finally said, "Hey, what's going on? What's wrong with you?" And I said, "Well, I just had these feelings. I don't know what's going on." And he's like, "Well, you don't need to worry about that till you're 21. When you're 21, then you can think about it, right?" And of course, then I decided that if it was going to be this way when I was 21, I would kill myself. And so from about that point on, I just decided my solution would be killing myself, would be to eradicate the mistake that God made. And I do believe this whole time I believed in something greater than me. And again, like it was this really twisted kind of thing, but I remember like kind of begging God like to show me what I can do different to make things different. And so he had all this angst. So by the time I had my first drink, guess what? I really needed one, right? And I had my first drink, and I got that little buzz on, and what happened to me was I understood the potential that this solution had for me in my life. I comprehended it immediately. Immediately things started quieting down, right? Immediately all of that noise and all of that angst and stuff started going away. And I could be right there in the present moment, and I could be with my fellows, and I wasn't less than, and I didn't have to work that hard at being better than. I could just be okay in my skin. So when we talk about the disease of addiction and we talk about various substances and stuff, those were my solution. What a great solution to a kid who was overridden with anxiety and fear, okay? And a little resentment because I thought you all were doing this to me, right? And so that first drink was very, very powerful. And I would like to tell you that my drinking career took off and I ended up on Skid Row quickly. That did not happen. I drank for a number of years very successfully. And as a matter of fact, I drank all the way into grad school. I also happened to have achieved a lot in school, and I ended up going to law school. And again, I'm telling you this because for two reasons. One, pride and ego, and a little bit of smarts and manipulativeness. Guess what? They can get you a long way. They can help you accomplish a lot of things. And I also tell you this because these are the things that I thought disqualified me from becoming an addict. An addict was for people who couldn't figure it out, people who were weak, and that wasn't me, right? And so I was good with that. So I felt I was very safe. In fact, my alcoholism and addiction runs in my family. And I remember my dad sitting me down and going, "Hey, this runs in your family, and you need to know about it because there's a hereditary component to it, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, okay, got it, Dad. Yeah, that may be your mother and some other people, but that's not me. It's not possible." So several years later, I come out of the closet and I discover the party circuit. You guys know what that is? Is that still a thing? I don't know. I don't pay enough attention to it anymore to know if it even happens anymore. I don't know. But anyway, so I discovered the party circuit, and at this time I had a really great salaried position at a big tech company in Northern Illinois in Chicago. And I was, it was a cushy job, and I got to go to Europe a lot, and I got to, it was like, to me, it was like very good for my ego, and made me feel good about myself. And I really felt like, and at the same time, the partying and that kind of stuff was taking bigger and bigger proportions. And I remember actually like dancing on some box at Crowbar at 2 a.m., going, if those stiffs back in that office could only see me now, look at how cool I am. And it was all a continuation of that thing where I was like, I felt I could breathe. I felt I was no longer plagued. The party chemicals became a solution, was my next solution. And I'll tell you what my first experience with crystal meth was. We'd been dragging on for several days, and my friends seemed to have more energy than I did, and they're like, hey, why don't you try this? And I should also tell you that I was a drug snob, right? First I was like, well, I'll drink, but this is way back in my younger days, but I would be like, I'll drink, but I'm not going to smoke anything. That's kind of druggy, right? And pretty soon I was smoking stuff, and then I'm like, well, I'm never going to snort anything, right? Because that's really kind of cracky. And then I'm like, right? And then all of those yets took place. I'm not going to smoke it out of a glass pipe because that looks like I should be doing that on Lower Wacker Drive, in Chicago. And I'm certainly not going to inject it, and I ended up there too, right? That shows the progression of the disease. That shows what powerlessness is about, and that was me. So the disease progressed. I ended up doing those things, but I recall my first experience with crystal meth was just like my first experience with alcohol. It was the solution I had been looking for. My mind quieted down and focused, right? And I'm always afraid when I come up here that my mind's going to be completely blank, right? As though my mind has ever been completely blank. Right? And I feel like it is suggested in this program that you learn how to meditate, and I've been meditating for 12 years, and I can't even get close to blank. But what happened with my first experience with meth was I got that solution. I had that same very powerful experience as I had when I first drank so many years ago. At this point, I'm 23, 24. I have a law degree. I have a great job. And it's like in Bill's story where he says, I had arrived. I'd arrived, right? Look at me. Look at me. Like all that angst gone. By the way, I had long since broken up with God, right? I have no use for him because he was punishing me. So I'm just going to make the best of it, right? And I'm going to be real gay now, right? And there's something about meth that... I may have thought I was a top before... But after, no. So anyway, so look, so that continued on, and here's what happened to me. Sufficient reasons start showing up, and what I mean by sufficient reasons are sufficient reasons to stop or moderate started showing up, and what differentiates us from them, from the normies, and I don't know any normal crystal meth addict or user, sorry, not addict, right? But what differentiates us is when sufficient reason shows up, a normal human being can do a cost-benefit analysis and go, the cost is too high, the benefit is not good enough, and therefore I'm going to stop doing it, right? And, like my friends were like, that Suicide Tuesday, when I'm curled up on the sofa in the fetal position crying, like, I don't want that, I think I'll stop or moderate, right? For me, those reasons started showing up, and guess what I did? We'll get it right. We'll get the chemical balance. We'll get the chemical equation right? This time, and then of course, I wanted to say Gina. G was introduced. Stephen and I had this friend that was like, we had all these cutesy little girl names for the drugs, Wendy and Stacy and Gina and Tina, and all that. And my friend was real surly and grumpy most of the time, and he was like, just call them by their name. It's methamphetamine. It's gamma hydroxybutyrate, you know? But you know, by this time I had kind of developed an affinity for G, right? And I was doing quite a bit of that. And so the disease progressed and sufficient reasons started showing up. And when those reasons started showing up, I'm like, well, you know, I got to get the chemical balance right. At the same time, stuff was happening. My great career, I was on this really good trajectory. I was in the top box of performers. They were like sending me all over the world and stuff like that. Well, guess what started happening? My performance started suffering, you know? And I was like, that's not good, you know? Like, and every time something like really serious would happen, I would go, this has got to be enough. This has got to be enough. We're gonna stop now. We're gonna slow it down, slow our roll a little bit. And what would happen for me is like, a day later, or a week later, or a month, I would find myself in the same situation, only worse, right? And that is called the progression of the disease of addiction. The price continued to get high, right? It got higher and higher and higher, and guess what my use did? It climbed with the progression of the disease. That's what distinguishes us. That's what makes us bodily and mentally different than our fellows, right? And so the disease progressed and stuff started showing up, and I stopped showing up for work. Turns out they like you to show up when you're in a position like I was in, right? Turns out they like you to show up cohesive and coherent and not completely off your effing rocker, right? And so, you know, it's funny, I had this friend that was like, okay, the random drug program at this company is not random, and I run it. And this was a using buddy of mine. So he's like, I'm going to warn you if you get on the list, okay? I'm going to let you know. And this is like we were tweaking out somewhere, I don't know where, but I'm like, okay, got it. All right, warn me, right? Because I know they're thinking something's up. They keep asking me what's wrong with me. And I tell them depression. I'm depressed, you know. And it's a very sad story, I know. And they, you know, my aunt died like 60 times. I don't know, you know, that kind of stuff. So one of the things that showed up was random drug test. I'm like, Rich, you didn't call me. Now we had a little shortage of supply that week. And so it happened to be like 3 or 4 days where I had gone without. And so evidently I passed the drug test. And I used to say, fortunately, and now I go, perhaps unfortunately, right? The only thing I responded to at my bottom was enough pain to do whatever it took to do something different, right? And so, look, I tried a bunch of different stuff. When the sufficient reasons started showing up, I didn't like those icky consequences. So one of the things I did was I called the helpline, and I described to the helpline, there was an addict or an alcoholic on the other end of the helpline. They were like, describe what was going on. And they're like, we suggest you go to a meeting. And I'm like, can't you just give me the secret over the phone? And they're like, we did go to a meeting, you know? Here are some meetings. And they had identified themselves as an addict or an alcoholic who had recovered. And at that time, here's the deal. I was unwilling to go to that length. Just simply go to a meeting. Because here's what I thought. I had some old ideas about what the fellowship was about. And the old ideas were like, you guys sat in church basements, because that's what we do in Chicago, and desperately cling to your sobriety and complain about how terrible life is without your chemicals every single night. That's what you do. That's the image I had. I'm like, I want nothing, no part of that. I want nothing to do with that. And so I stayed out there for a very long time after that. The other thing I did was I did a little self-styled recovery program. And so what I did was I had great insurance, and I got a therapist, and I got a psychiatrist, and I went and presented some symptoms. I remember being at the psychiatrist's office and going like, yeah, I get really manic and mania, you know, and followed by days of depression. I left the chronic long-term methamphetamine abuse out of the picture. But look, here's what I was looking for. I was looking for my solution in a bottle. I was actually hoping that this was what was wrong with me. I didn't know what was wrong with me, and I was careening towards something bad. I knew that. And so I remember getting the prescription and going, feeling hopeful when I was going to get it filled, really believing that this was my solution. I get on some psych meds and like that'll kind of even things out. And all that did was extend the chemical equation that was running through my bloodstream, right? And so that didn't work, and that didn't help. And In fact, the other thing I did was I had this therapist. I had a therapist appointment once a week, and I told him all about my problems, and I told him about how everyone is bugging me and all that other stuff, and I left out the stuff about the drugs and the booze, and at that time I figured I was going to abstain from the thing that was really my problem, which was crystal meth, and I'm just going to drink during this time. You all know how well that works, right? So I think I abstained from crystal meth at that time for 4 weeks, but my drinking career really took off at that time, right? But at the end of this, my last appointment with my therapist, I couldn't make it weekly, because that was just too much for me, too much of a commitment for me. But my last appointment, I'm using in the bathroom next to his office, right before our appointment, and it was a great appointment, I promise you. He didn't get a word in edgewise. So again, look, I was hoping that I would find a solution to my problem, and the thing that was really bad about it, as I'm careening toward the bottom, things of meaning and value start leaving me, start leaving my life, start evaporating, if you will. My family in Michigan, it turns out, so I thought I was hiding it really well. I lived in Chicago, they lived in Michigan, and I thought I was hiding it really well, and it turns out they went to some Al-Anon meetings. Like, I wasn't hiding it that great, right? So I remember the day they detached with love. I remember that day, right? I remember the day they stood back and said, we can't watch this, and still, and I was as powerless and helpless as they were, right? That's the truth about this disease. So I remember, so this goes on, and I'm showing up at work, like, my work week is, Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock till Thursday afternoon at 4, and the rest of the time is the weekend for me, right? And like most of you, I had a big SUV at that time, and I would smoke in the back of the SUV under a blanket, right? Because the blanket protected me from the cameras that were in the light poles. As you know, y'all know those microscopic cameras that you can't see. You know that, right? And I did that, and then I decided that they were peering in from the side, so I had to go to the bathroom, or the gas station, the nearby gas station, and use. But that's kind of how it looked, and I stopped being able to show up. And what happened to me was, I had a boss who really loved and cared about me. And I got to tell you, like, people say that big, giant corporations are heartless and don't give a crap about you. That's not true. And this guy, who was my boss, dealt with me like as is described in the Chapter 2 Employers. So what he did is he slowly started trying to tighten the noose to try to get me to straighten up and fly right. And he's like, this is going poorly for you, and I don't know what your problem is, and he's not allowed by law to tell us what our problem is, right? But it's going poorly for you, and it's not going to go well unless you can get it straight. And so what he did was he set up, and this time I'm managing a big team, and I've got this giant account, like the world's biggest cellular network in Europe. That company was my account, and I thought I was very, very important, although my team was doing all the work. I was doing nothing. I was like Gene out in their offices. And so my boss is like, you got to get this straight. And of course, what happens? I'm unable to. I'm powerless at this point, right? I have lost the power of choice, which means I was using against my will. I had every intention not to. I had every intention to stop. In fact, after I did my self-styled therapy thing, my use became daily, and I didn't get sober after that for a number of years. So I didn't draw a sober breath for maybe 5 years. And I remember I would have to go. We lived in the Chicago suburbs, and I would have to go downtown to score. And here's some insanity for you: every trip downtown would be, in my mind, was my last trip. Every single one of them was like, we're going to blow it out this time because we got to straighten up and fly right, and this has got to stop, and we know it's bad for us, and all that other stuff. We got to stop. And if you would have hooked me up to a lie detector, I would have passed with flying colors because I sincerely believed that this was the last time. And those days turned into weeks, turned into months, turned into years. That's what they mean by insanity, and that's the kind of insanity I suffered from, right? The problem centers in my mind. So all kinds of terrible stuff happened. I remember I woke up on I came to on Inner Lakeshore Drive at an intersection with my foot on the brake, surrounded by Chicago squads, right? Yeah, it was like a cop show montage thing, and they, as soon as I got myself free of that, guess what? Guess what I do when I'm burdened and troubled? I use, right? As soon as I got free of that situation, my solution was to use. And again, like that was like, oh, I'm standing in my underwear and handcuffs on Inner Lakeshore Drive at 6 a.m. on Thursday. And people are riding by in their cars, nice, normal people on their way to work, dressed kind of like this. And they're looking at me. And I do recall how they were looking at me. And I'm in boxers without a shirt, in handcuffs. And I recall that. And I recall just feeling like how divorced from anything that looks like normal my life was. The other thing is that we would have, what would you call them, Stephen? Domestic disagreements? And the neighbors, we lived in this little condo. It ended up being, it's just a house of squalor, but we lived in this little condo, and we had neighbors on all sides of us. And they all hated us because of the fights and the noise and the violence, except for the neighbor upstairs who was completely deaf. She loved us. But the police were getting called to our house on the regular. And I'm not making light of any violence in the household at all, right? They were in our house on the regular, and but the thing is that Stephen won sometimes, so that makes it okay, right? We're even, are we? No. So the police were getting called fairly regularly to our house, and invariably, one of the older officers would pull me aside. Every single time, this happened like 3-4 times, they'd pull me aside and they go, there's help. You can get help. I'd be like, what? You need help. What are you talking about, right? Here I am deluded into thinking I still have some means of controlling this if I wanted to, right? I still think I'm controlling it by choice. I still think every time I return to it, I'm making a choice. But if you look at my track record over the number of years that I used, it could not possibly have been a choice. If you look at the price that I paid, it could not possibly have been a choice. So what happened is the news at work at my cushy job tightened. I showed up at work on a Monday morning. It was Monday, I want to say it was after Labor Day. So it was right after IML. I mean, it's a Tuesday morning, perhaps. John knows what I'm talking about, right? The Tuesday after IML, so I'm showing up at work and I'm like really just barely breathing, and my boss summons me over to his office. And at this time, I knew something terrible was going to stop this. I knew I was going to get fired. In fact, my honey had been fired about, a year before, right? And he spent that year after he got fired looking for a job, which consisted of masturbating and using. And so I'd come home and I'd be like, so have you been looking for a job today? Anyway, so I show up at work and I'm like, this is it. This is when I get fired. And I was sure that was going to happen. My boss, his admin, summons me over to his office. I see the security guard in there. I see the HR person in there. I'm like, this is it. This is the end. I knew this was going to happen, by the way. I was just waiting for it. And I felt this sense of relief. I got in trouble with the police. Each time that kind of stuff would happen, I'd feel this sense of relief because I thought, this has got to be enough. Maybe this is the thing that will stop me, that will get my attention and get me to muster up the will to stop doing this. And I remember feeling that same level of hope with my boss. I'm going to get fired. Now something's really got to change. So he calls me into his office and he's like, hey, he hands me a slip of paper and he goes, here's some options for you to get well. We don't know what your problem is. We're not going to guess. We will get in trouble if we do, but here's some options to get well. And one of them was medical leave of absence, chemical dependency, blah, 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 right? So I'm like, okay, let me go back to my desk and get my laptop. And they're like, no. Officer Friendly is going to escort you out of the building. And if you can get well, your job will be preserved for you and waiting for you when you get back, right? So I went out on another run for a couple of weeks, right? Until I was left alone in, it wasn't a couple of weeks, it was a few days actually. See, it's like spiritual orange theory up here. Being honest for an hour is like a challenge for me. I find myself with my dealer. We had gone on another run and he had run low on supplies. I don't know about y'all, but I started getting a little antsy and anxious just when the supplies started running low. I felt hopeful when they were top back off, but there wasn't much hope as soon as they started dwindling, because it meant going through the whole routine again, getting and using and finding ways and means to get more. And I remember him, my dealer, I was a primary source of his income. I remember him going, I can't do this with you anymore. I'm like, just one more run, man. He's like, go to the hospital, get help. You're crazy. And so I did just that. And I decided I was going to, I'm kind of she like this, but I'm like, I'm going to look up a good rehab, right? Because I got good insurance. And I looked there's a rehab in Chicago called Chicago Lakeshore Hospital. And they have a great website, and they have a gay unit. And I'm like, whoa, that's where I need to go, right? And so I go there. I remember, by the way, so after my dealer said this, like, we're not going on another run. This is not happening. I'm done with you. I knew he was coming down in the suburbs. And when he came down, he was like stark raving crazy. And maybe a little violent, right? So I knew I wasn't welcome back in the suburbs, and I really had no place else to go, right? I had run out of options. There was no place else to surf. There were no other people who wanted me around. And I remember hopping a cab over to this hospital and thinking to myself, these medical professionals must know some solution to this. So I'm just going to go and do whatever they tell me for now. Now, this is 4 years after I called the helpline. This is 4 years after I was not even willing to go to a meeting, right? Now I'm a little more desperate, right? Now I'm a little more willing. I don't have many options. Life had slowly closed in around me. I get in this hospital, they start doing the intake, and I notice, they waved some people in around me behind the door, the exit door. And I'm like, I start backing out. I'm in there, they're asking me questions about my using, blah, blah, blah. And by the way, this hospital doesn't look anything like the website. I did not see the Zen garden. I did not see, in fact, the windows looked like little arrow slits, and they had bars on them. And it turns out this place, by the way, was a place to sober people up on their way through the system to prison. And me. So I go in there, they do the intake, they do all this stuff, and the guy that's doing the intake is really kind and really nice, and he waves some people around behind me because he sees me start to back up. And I'm like, perhaps this is a mistake, perhaps I've gone overboard here, I think I'm just gonna try it my way. And they said, no, actually, you're gonna be our guest for the next 72 hours because you're a danger to yourself and others. Now, remember, at that, I thought it was supposed to be about what it was like. And what it was like was, I'm just a suburban executive having a rough patch, right? And they could see things, they could see me as I really was. And as I really was psychotic and a danger to society. So they locked me up. And they did the thing where they were like waking me up every 10 minutes and doing all that stuff. Maybe it wasn't 10 minutes, but there you go, another lie. I don't know, but and they put me on heavy psych meds and heavy antipsychotics, and I remember passing the cafeteria to go up to the locked ward, and I remember smelling the food being cooked there, and I remember thinking, I haven't slept like a normal person in years. I haven't eaten like a normal person in years. My diet habits were like, pizza once a week, maybe, And so I just remember feeling for a moment safe. Just for a moment, right? Like these people may have my best interests at heart. The other thing they did was when I had packed a little bag, my little bag. It happened to be my bathhouse bag, right? And I had forgotten to clear out some of the bathhouse accoutrement and just packed my rehab stuff in there, right? So, 4 boxes of cigarettes, got it. He reaches down deep in the bag and he pulls this like elbow grease on the table. He reaches down there again and he's like, you remember that Eros that came in like $135 industrial vat of Eros? Yeah, he pulls that out and he sets it on the table and he looks at me like, you won't be needing these in here. So, and then when I got up to my room, they told me, watch out for your roommate. He's been in here for like 18 months. He sleep with one eye open. So look, here's what happened to me. So at this time, the truth about my bottom was that I was suffering a spiritual death. And I want to go back to my bottom sometimes and think, oh, it was just about money, and it was just about looking bad. And, by the way, I fear shame and embarrassment more than I fear grievous bodily harm. I do, right? That's the level of self you're dealing with here. And the truth about my bottom was it was a loneliness like it's hard for me to even imagine today because of the contrast of being in this fellowship, because of the contrast, the richness my life has spiritually today. But I remember just feeling very little to no hope. The psych meds kicked in and I felt a little more hopeful. But I went to my first they had an AA H&I meeting there. This is my first 12-step meeting ever. I'm completely befogged. I'm completely twitchy and jittery. And they let us all down out of our cell blocks, our rooms. And we go to this big central pod, and the speaker, the person who's supposed to come share their experience, strength, and hope, didn't show up. And so they put a speaker tape in. They're like, oh, this will do. Listen to this, right? And now I can barely tell you the sequence of events around a whole 9-10 years of my life. I was chronically using crystal meth for almost 10 years. And but I remember very clearly and very vividly hearing this speaker tape. And the speaker shared about her experience and shared about her feelings and shared about what powerlessness meant. And I remember feeling a little glimmer of hope here. I remember feeling like there might be something possible for me, and there might be a solution. And that was my first experience. That was my first introduction to that thing that happens between all of us, which is when I meet you and you have recovered and I discover you're just exactly like me, guess what? It might be possible for me too. So I spend a few days in detox here, and they released me to the suburbs, to a program out there, a partial hospitalization program. And again, I don't know at what point I was willing to tentatively admit that I was an addict. I think it took a few days in that hospital, and finally I'm like, okay, I'll go along. I'm an addict. I had no idea what that meant. I had no idea what powerlessness meant. I didn't know what unmanageability meant. Y'all started talking about God, and God and I had gotten a divorce, and so that wasn't going to work for me. All of that stuff, but I felt like it was I didn't have any other choice but to follow what they suggested. Thank God I had the ambulance, which I consider rehab, kind of the ambulance that gets me to the program. And that's exactly what happened. So I go to this partial hospitalization program. They tell me to get a sponsor. And I'm like, I told them I had a sponsor for weeks before I actually got one. And by the way, I'm on a leave of absence from my cushy job, and I'm given the luxury of focusing strictly on my sobriety, right? I don't have anything else to worry about. My honey was at home, and he was kicking it on the couch, right? Like you do, because, unfortunately that was all we could do at that time. And I start following instructions and following direction. And one of the directions was this, again, not brimming with honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness at first. And so I would go yeah, I have a sponsor. His name is Philip Glass, or whatever. And they're like, okay, check the box. Okay, good. Accountability, right? That's fine. But I did finally get one. And I remember being in a meeting one night, and the only thing that stood out to me about picking a sponsor was you want what they have, And I heard this guy share, and I heard this guy speak, and he had been an executive at Delta, and my ego attached to that real quick because I'm like, oh, I'm a big shot too, And but I remember hearing him speak in a way that was the same way I responded to this first speaker tape, which is something spoke to me here, and I felt I could relate to him, and I felt I could trust him. And he was awesome. He was full of the program. He was full of suggestions. He was available to me almost all the time. He had 8 months sober, so he was a spiritual giant, right? And that guy ended up sponsoring me for the next 5 years, my only point about that is he was big into the action, right? He didn't really care that much about the feelings. And his theory was that the feelings always follow the actions, right? And one of the first things he told me was, he goes, the program promises two things. It promises freedom from the obsession to use. Like, that sounded good because that obsession was on me a lot early on. It was on me a lot. And it promises a new way of life. And I'm like, I don't know if I need a new way of life, I'm doing pretty good here, So it promised me those two things, and I remember that sounding fairly appealing to me. He was big into action. He was big into service. He was into going to a lot of meetings. He was into writing steps. Those are the primary areas that we work on, right? Unity, bring the body to meetings, immerse myself in fellow alcoholics and addicts, right? Unity, service. You know what service is. He taught me, like, even if I have a day sober, I have something to give back to the guy that's sitting in the room who doesn't know how to get a day, right? I actually remember one of my first meetings. I remember, like, there's people like in NA in Chicago, they used to share their clean time, and you go around the room, and if it's a big meeting, everyone would be like, I'm Erik, my date is June 7th, 2006, and everyone would go around, and I remember hearing people who had 10, 12, 15 years. I remember just shutting off when I heard them share, when I heard them say things. But I remember this girl sharing that she had 85 days, right? And 85 days seemed possible to me, right? And so I really trained in. So if you're new and you think you can't be useful, you absolutely can. In fact, there's some of us old timers that people won't even listen to because people don't think that's possible for them. So anyway, my sponsor was big about giving back. He's like, if you sit in too many meetings without leaving something there, you're stealing, right? He had all this great wisdom, and he was just so helpful to me. And I grew, and like, my program got really good. I worked through all 12 steps. I had a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps. And then guess what happened? I arrived, right? I graduated. Right, and I was working those three things: unity, service, recovery. But I started getting into service, and my sponsor was into service, and he ended up he was doing area level service, and he was like the chairman of the area. And I thought, chairman, and I could do that, and I was like all about the service. And at the time, I was sponsoring people because guess what? My spirit had awakened. The anger had dissipated. Some people saw what I had and were attracted to it and wanted what I had, wanted to know what I had done, which is exactly what sponsorship is, right? So I was sponsoring people and this kind of stuff. But then I started getting ambitious with service, and I started really going kind of all out on the service stuff. And then I didn't have so much time for the sponsees, and I didn't have so much time to work steps. By the way, I worked them all 12, and then we're good, right? The book says clean house, right? And I don't know about y'all, but my house, I can't clean it once 5 years ago, and it remains clean. That is not how my house cleaning works, right? Although he does most of the cleaning. No, he doesn't. I'm lying. I do some of it sometimes. So I stopped cleaning house. I stopped working a 10th step. I stopped taking the action that I need to take in order to stay sane so that I can stay sober. And my current sponsor is really big on saying this, pointing out that place in the big book that says the insanity returns and then we use. See, I always thought I'll see the insanity coming from a mile away and I'll never use again. That's baloney, right? The problem with insanity to me is I cannot distinguish the true from the false. The problem with insanity is I don't freaking know I'm in it. I don't know I'm in it, right? That's the problem with it, right? So if the insanity returns first and then I use, I better figure out how I'm going to stay sane. And what I used to do, what I did in my early sobriety to stay sane is I came around you guys, and you guys served up some truth about how I'm coming at the world, and served up some truth about how this disease is showing up in my life today. And I listened and I paid attention because I was kind of desperate at that time. I didn't want any more of that. I wasn't necessarily running toward what you guys had, but I certainly was running from what had me. Certainly, right? That was a good motivator for a while, right? And then I started getting into service and my ego started taking over, and I'm like, I don't need to do that step stuff, all the stuff you normal addicts do. I don't need to do any of that. I'm going to run this thing, right? And I'm embarrassed to share that this NA World Headquarters was in Van Nuys, California, and I remember kind of looking at, I wonder what it's going to be like to live in Van Nuys when I'm running this thing. Seriously, that's the level of ego, that's the level of self that I came in with, right? That's it. So life got good until it didn't, and what happened to me was this. I stopped working the steps. I stopped having time. I stopped saying yes. Stop having time for sponsees. Sponsees are really kind of inconvenient, you know. You know, I got service stuff over here. I've got ambitions. And I got sick. I got real sick. I went back into untreated addiction. And what happened to me after that was, I was going to say I stopped having time for sponsees, but they mostly moved on, right? They don't want what the happy farmer has, right? And I became angry and I became indignant and all of that other stuff that is assured to me will happen. I believe I'm perfectly described in the first 164 pages of the big book. I do. I'm a textbook addict, as described there, because everything it describes about what will happen if I don't do the action happens to me. And everything that happens, that all the promises that are made if I do the action have also happened, right? So my spirit is going back to sleep and all this stuff, and what happens to me is I get this big job offer down in Austin. And I'm in Chicago at this time. And now my ego's really fired up. Now my ambition's really fired up. And guess what happens to me? My head says to me, you've really always suffered from ADD, haven't you? And it would be a shame if you went down and took this big new job, and embarrassed yourself by failing. So we got to get that ADD under control. Now, at this time, with the program that I was working, this sounded perfectly reasonable and not insane at all, right? So I looked for doctors. Once again, I'm shopping for doctors. Once again, I'm looking for that solution in a bottle that's going to fix all my problems, right? And I remember the night before I drove down to Austin, and again, I'm I've got four and a half years at this point. I had an appointment the night before I was going to get in the car and drive down here. I had an appointment with a psychiatrist, and we get to the end of that appointment. I'm like, okay, come on, medication. And he's like, oh, no, we got a lot more work to do. And I'm like, oh, dang it. And I couldn't find someone who was irresponsible enough to prescribe a methamphetamine addict amphetamines. Okay? And I believe, look again, the book describes something called an allergy. The book describes an allergy. And what happens to me was, it doesn't matter what my intentions were before I put the first one in me. All bets were off after I put it in me. And I know every one of you has experienced that. That is the allergy. Right? The phenomenon of craving starts after I take the first one. And so I'm off to the races, and there isn't enough, and before I know it, I go well, I'm going to use a gentleman. It's Friday night, and by Saturday we're going to sleep in, and by Monday we're going to be good for work. That's not how it ends up for me 100% of the time. I use on Friday, and I find myself in some weird apartment at 2 a.m. on Tuesday, and how did I get here? So that's what happened to me. And so why do I believe that if I got it out of a bottle or if I got it out of a baggie, why do I believe it will be any different? Why do I believe that I'm immune from having that reaction if I got it out of a bottle? And in fact, I don't believe I am immune. And I believe that I had worked the steps backwards to the point where I was no longer powerless in my mind, right? I could control this one, right? Thank God I couldn't find anyone who was reckless and irresponsible enough to give me that. So what happened was I get down to Austin, and an old-timer friend of mine said, hey, Erik, when you get down there, do me a favor. Make me a promise. Make me a promise that you're going to go, no matter how busy you get, you're going to go to a meeting every night when you get down there. And he knew what I needed. He knew the shape that I was in. He knew I was dangerous in a very dangerous situation. And so I said, yeah, okay, Mark, I'll do that. Go to a meeting, blah, blah, blah. And I did. And I started going to the Galano Club down there. And I started having the same experience I did in the very beginning of my sobriety, which was I'm full of angst, I'm full of fear, I'm full of, doubt. All the bedevilments are there. The bedevilments, they read like a list of symptoms of untreated addiction, right? Having trouble with personal relationships. That's the first one that shows up for me every time. I think there's a reason it's the first one on the list, right? We couldn't control our emotional nature. That's a big one for me, right? I was going off left and right. I was shooting people all over the place, right? We were prey to misery and depression. Right? What I started hearing in those rooms down there in Austin is I started hearing some solution again, and I got a sponsor. And I got a sponsor who, she's pretty hardcore. She's pretty hardcore, right, Kyle? Kyle knows, and Kyle's a beneficiary of her great sponsorship because it flows downward, right? Everything that she teaches me, I try to pass on. And so she showed me, here's what she's really great at. She's been sober for like 900 years. And she showed me where I was. What she did was, she showed me whenever I experienced something, she would show me where it was in the first 164 pages, and then she would share her experience and show me how she relates to that. And I would find I could relate to that too. And that's how I determined that I'm a textbook addict as laid out in those first 164 pages. Now, if you guys, I really strongly recommend you find yourself in those pages too, because in that solution, there is something that's really, really powerful and effective for me. It tells me I have to have a spiritual experience. Right? It is that my life is contingent on having a spiritual awakening. Now, if you would have told me just to have a spiritual awakening, I would have thought, I have to think about it, and I have to get my head around it. I think about these concepts about God and the universe, and that's not it at all. It's take action and the Spirit will follow. Take action and the feelings will follow. Almost 100% of the time when I'm asked to take an action in this program, guess what? I'm like, I don't know how that's going to help me. Just like the helpline. Same deal, right? It's the same mindset. Like this insanity that I suffer from is persistent. It's persistent. So anyway, she shows me where I'm in the book. The first thing she shows me is, isn't he a self-seeker even when trying to be kind? I'm like, no. I'm nice sometimes, out of completely unconditional love. And she's like, BS, you're not. And I discovered that, and I didn't want to be that way anymore. That became objectionable to me. The other thing is that when I first sat down with her, I'm like, I don't know. She's like, we're going to dig into some inventory. We're going to get into some resentments. And at that time, remember, all my sponsees had fired me in Chicago, and no one was picking up on what I had to offer in Austin. And I said, I don't know what we're going to work on. I'm at perfect peace, right? Yeah, exactly. She laughed and laughed, right? And she said, well, I'll tell you what. Let's just do this. Who bugged you today? And I'm like, well, I rolled over and he was breathing wrong. And that kind of bugged me. She's like, great, write it down. And she's like, what next? That guy that got in front of me on the on-ramp, that entitled motherfucker, right? And she's like, write it down. And what happened to me was I got in touch with some resentment. As soon as I could see what resentment isn't always seething rage. Sometimes it's just annoyance. Sometimes it's just that thing that comes up every single day that bugs me about you or the proxy I have for you, right? And we got to causing conditions. We did a bunch of inventory, and we looked at resentment, and I got free. And then what started happening is people started wanting what I had. People started seeing some change in me, I sometimes shortchange what has happened to me since, I'm in need of good sponsorship, and I'm in need of the disciplines today more than I ever have been. Right? In fact, I think what they mean by the road narrows. I love this analogy where it's like, I don't know if you've ever been to Denver and you drive up into the mountains and there's some really narrow and windy mountain roads. And what happens is there's less room for error. There's less room for cutting corners on your program. There's less room for taking liberties at what is suggested, right? That's what it means, the road narrows. But guess what happens too? So I'm down in Denver and I'm driving and there's big wide freeways and I can weave around a little bit, and that's my early sobriety. And as I progress in my sobriety, the road narrows and things get a little more dangerous. The heights get higher, but they also get more amazing and more breathtaking. And I never ever describe the spiritual experience that I've had adequately. I can't. It happens in here, and there aren't words to describe what you all have given me. And since I've been really thinking a lot about what the fellowship of the Spirit means, and that's a theme of this conference. And so you guys knew I was going to do it. By the way, my sponsees know me as a big book, enthusiast maybe? So again, because I found a lot of solution in here, and I'm really grateful that I have. But I'm going to read you the paragraph where the fellowship of the Spirit is written. It says, abandon yourself to God as you understand God. And if you don't understand God very well, guess what? Just come in here and abandon yourself to us. We'll show you the actions you need to take to have a spiritual awakening and a spiritual experience of your own. Admit your faults to him and your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. That has been my experience. I could not be more grateful for the life that you've given me, for the suggestions that you've given me, for the love and tolerance that you've shown me. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the conference and enjoying more of the fellowship of the Spirit. Thanks.